Welcome to Fast Intelligent Care, the podcast for occupational therapists who want to make a real impact. Every Tuesday, we bring you fresh ideas, clear insights, and practical solutions in assistive technology. Let's make smarter, faster, and more effective care simple. Your journey starts now. Today, we're lifting the lid, quite literally, on hoist attachment types. We'll look at different attachment types, such as your 2-point, 4-point, 6-point spreader bars, as well as your pivot frames. We'll go through what types of clients you can think of and how these different attachment types affect posture, comfort, and safety. So first things first, why do hoist attachment types matter? Well, choosing the right hoist attachment isn't just about getting someone from point A to point B. It's about ensuring safety, dignity, comfort, and efficiency for that specific client's needs. A poorly matched attachment can cause discomfort, so the sling positioning can feel too tight or too loose. There could be some instability, so the wrong spreader bar or yoke can make transfers unsafe. And then there could also be a risk to caregivers, because it might require awkward positionings to attach loops or clips, and that could possibly increase risk of injury. And remember, it's not just about the client, it's about the caregiver too. Using the wrong attachment could mean awkward postures, back strain, and increased injury risk. So let's break them down. Firstly, we'll talk about the two main type of hoist attachments. So we get our loop and clip attachments. Our loop attachments are the most common. So they're like your Swiss Army knife of hoist attachments. They're quite versatile and widely used. So you'll find your loop attachments on your 2-point, 4-point, and 6-point spreader bars. You won't find them on your pivot frames, as these will use clip attachments. Loop attachments offer flexibility because you can adjust height, angle, and position simply by selecting different loop lengths. Pro tip, loop slings allow for positioning adjustments, whether your client needs to sit upright or recline slightly for comfort. However, something to take into account with loop attachments is that we can't adjust the person's position while they're suspended in the hoist or in the sling. We do need to put them back down and then change our loop length. Whereas with our clip attachments, the person's position can be changed while they are in the sling and while they are being lifted up. So it does allow for a more gradual change in positioning. And it might also be easier for caregivers, as they don't have to try and figure out or think about what loop length to use for different positions, as they can change the person's position using that pivot frame. Clip attachments are more specialized. So instead of looping onto a spreader bar, they snap into a clip style pivot frame. And that's going to give you extra security. They're ideal for clients with poor trunk control or poor head control who need that added stability. But here's the catch. Clip slings must match the hoist pivot frame attachment exactly. You can't mix and match your loop and clip slings to pivot frames. So very important that you can't use a loop sling on a pivot frame that has clip attachments, and you can't use your clip attachments on a loop attachment type, such as your 2-point, 4-point, 6-point spreader bars. So your key takeaways with loop versus clip attachment is that loops are going to be versatile and adjustable. Your clips are going to be stable but less flexible, but it does allow you to change the position of the person while they're in the hoist or in the sling. Always check that your sling and hoist are compatible. Now let's talk about the different attachment types, your spreader bars, sling bars or yokes, and pivot frames, because they go hand in hand with your slings. So firstly, we'll start with a 2-point spreader bar. These are compact and easy to use. So there's only 2 attachment points on a 2-point spreader bar. So very quick and easy to attach those slings. They're going to be great for small spaces and quick transfers, because it's not going to take that long to be able to attach those loops. And it helps maintain a closed postural position, which is going to be ideal for clients who need that extra stability. So the advantages of the 2-point spreader bar. They're quick and easy to apply, as straps are close together. They can be used for seated to seated transfers, as they facilitate a more aggressive sitting position. 2-point spreader bars are going to assist with the management of spasms and high muscle tone, as you're going to have a more closed sitting postural position. It is also great for smaller clients. So the case we have for you today to explain the use of the 2-point spreader bar, we have James. He is a smaller individual, so quite slender. He needs to have a very closed sitting postural position to prevent any abnormal muscle tone. So his therapist decided to try a 2-point spreader bar, which was great for his caregivers as they could very easily and quickly attach the loops to his spreader bar. Some disadvantages of the 2-point spreader bar though is that it can be uncomfortable for some clients because of that more closed postural position. A 2-point spreader bar is not going to be great for your plus size or bariatric clients because they're not going to have enough space for that additional adipose tissue, especially those clients with that kind of apple body shape. Something also to take into account is with that 2-point spreader bar, that more closed postural sitting position, you're not going to have as much access with your commode apertures. Just a recap, your 2-point spreader bars are suitable for clients that are smaller, need to be transferred very quickly and easily, and clients that have either high muscle tone or spasms and need a closed postural sitting position. Now we have our 4-point spreader bar. This is more open and a natural sitting position, and it's ideal for those larger bariatric clients, and it gives you easier access for toileting and other medical procedures. Also, when you're having to do a floor lift, your 4-point spreader bar is going to be a lot easier to attach those loops than your 2-point spreader bar, because your 4-point spreader bar is going to at least bring those attachment hooks closer to the person's body, whereas your 2-point, it might be difficult to bring those loops closer. Important to note, with your 4-point spreader bar, it might be slightly more difficult to get someone into that 90-degree upright sitting position. You're going to really have to choose your loop attachments or height loop lengths very carefully to make sure that you're getting that nice upright seating posture, because you can potentially get someone in a more reclined position. Also, if you do have a client that does have that high muscle tone and spasms, because of this more open sling, it might increase that tone because they're not going to have as much of a closed posture. So for a 4-point spreader bar, we have Tom. He's a larger built individual. He's quite tall, but then also has an apple body shape. He used to have a 2-point spreader bar, but felt quite compressed and uncomfortable, especially with his stomach feeling compressed in, and he needed a more open sitting posture. So he was changed over to a 4-point spreader bar, which gave him a more natural open posture and was much better weight distribution, and it made transfers a lot more comfortable for him. He didn't have any abnormal muscle tone, so he didn't need to sit in that very upright posture that was required with our previous client. So just to recap, 4-point spreader bar, great for larger clients that want to be in a more natural, open sitting position, and good for access for toileting and medical procedures. Now we have our 6-point spreader bar. So this is going to provide extra width for better weight distribution. So if you imagine your 4-point spreader bar, you're going to have 2 attachments on the one side, 2 attachments on the other side, and the attachments are going to be facing away from each other. Now your 6-point spreader bar is going to have attachments on both sides in the middle between those 2. So it will be 3 points on the one side and 3 points on the other side. So the 6-point spreader bar can almost be seen as a hybrid between the 2 and 4-point spreader bar, where you can decide to just use the middle attachments to make it quick and easy to attach. But if you wanted to have a more open position, you could use it as a 4-point spreader bar. And you could, for example, have a client that needs more space by the shoulders because they might feel too closed in. So that's where you can then place those shoulder loops at the outer attachments. So it's going to open the sling while maintaining support. So for 6-point spreader bar, we have Mark. He's a client with muscular dystrophy, and he really struggled with feeling like his shoulders were kind of compressed in or internally rotated with a 2-point as well as a 4-point spreader bar. And that's where a 6-point spreader bar gave him that right balance of allowing a bit more width for the shoulders, but he could still be in a more natural sitting position and didn't have to be in as much of an upright sitting position as you would have with just the 2-point attachments. Something we also need to look at when we're looking at attachment types is not just how many attachment points we have, but what does that attachment type look like? For example, you can get your 2 and 4 point spreader bars that are kind of in this coat hanger style. These ones are going to be very much close to the client's face. It's going to be a more closed in position. So if you do have someone that might have some involuntary movements or behaviors, they might actually hit their head on this attachment type. However, you can get your 4 point yokes or spreader bars that are kind of this rounded attachment. So it's going to be a lot more open in front of the person's face. So they're going to probably feel a bit more comfortable. There's going to be less of a risk of that spreader bar or yoke hitting their head, and it will probably decrease a bit of anxiety as well. Now we'll go on to our pivot frames. Now the pivot frames are also a really good option if you do want more open space in front of the person, because it's going to have this frame open around the person. So your pivot frames are going to be great for your plus-sized clients that need more space within their sling. So especially if they have a bit of a belly or that apple shape, it's going to allow for very precise postural control, and it's going to be a more natural and supportive sitting position. And like I mentioned very briefly earlier, is that with your pivot frames, you don't have to worry about how you attach those loops in terms of what length, because you'll have clip attachments that you just attach and then you actually change the position, not with the loop length, but with that frame. So you'll be pushing it down or pulling it up to change them from a seated to a more reclined position. And you can also have this as a manual or a powered pivot frame. So if you have a powered pivot frame, it really takes away manual handling. So what you can do with your pivot frame is you can apply the sling or put the sling underneath a client while they're in a very flat lying position, and then gradually bring them up into the sitting position using the pivot frame, instead of having the caregivers use their own strength or strain their back and shoulders to bring the person up, especially if you don't have a profiling bed that can assist with bringing that person into a sitting position. So if they have just a normal bed and you want to use something to assist them into that sitting position before lifting them up and putting them into a chair or a recliner, this is where the pivot frame can also be a really good option. So advantages of your pivot frame is it's going to be increased comfort because of that more natural and supportive sitting position. It's going to be useful for your plus-sized clients because it's more open, and it's going to be a good option for clients with complex disabilities. It might also be a good option for someone that has a lot of pain that needs to have a very gradual, slow change in positioning. Disadvantages of your pivot frame though is that you're going to have to use very specific slings. So that means it might limit sling variety. So you're going to have to look for very specific slings that are made for that pivot frame, because sometimes it's like a keyhole attachment. It's a very specific design, whereas your loop slings are a lot easier in terms of getting it to be compatible spreader bar that is not necessarily from the same supplier. You could more easily get that compatibility right. Whereas with your clip attachments, most of the time, or majority of the time, you're going to have to use the sling and hoist of the same manufacturer. Another disadvantage of your pivot frames is that your sling attachments applications can be a little bit more difficult because it's a lot more rigid slings. Also, if you have that manual pivot frame, it will require caregivers to have quite a bit of strength to be able to operate that pivot frame, whereas you can mitigate that with your powered pivot frames, but that might not always be an option for your client because it will be a higher cost. So with our pivot frame, we have Daniel. He's a client with cerebral palsy, and he needs very precise postural adjustments. 2 and 4 point, even the 6 point spreader bar didn't really provide enough control or support, and that's why he needed to go with pivot frame. Daniel was very sensitive to any change in his posture, so he really needed a very supportive upright sitting position, and once he was in a really good seated position, he really needed to be held into that position. So it's a lot easier for them to put him into his power wheelchair, for example, and maintain that posture that they achieved. Now, the last attachment type that we'll go through is your stand assist attachments. Now, important, your standing slings. can have loop or clip attachments. And it's going to depend on what transfer aid you're using. So an example could be your Oxford-Up, Saracetti sit-to-stand transfer aid or your stand pivot transfer aids. Well, these will typically have a clip attachment, but your standing hoists can have loop attachments. But always important to look at the specific attachment for your transfer aid, as I have seen some very unique attachment types where sometimes it even looks like a rope that clips in or is held into position of standing hoists. So very important to make sure that when you are prescribing a standing aid, that you're going to look at the compatibility of your slings with that attachment type. Lastly, we'll look at our ceiling hoist and gantry systems attachments. Something that's important to know is even though it's not very common, you can get ceiling hoists with clip attachments and pivot frames and not just your spreader bar and loop attachments. But always check what ceiling hoist you're looking at or gantry system and make sure that it is compatible. Your ceiling hoists are going to be great for very small, tight spaces, and your gantries are going to be good for those temporary setups where someone's not in their forever home. They may be in a home that they're renting and they don't want to make permanent, or they aren't allowed to make any permanent changes to the house, or it might be a very old house and doesn't have that reinforced ceiling that allows for a ceiling hoist. So even when you're looking at your ceiling hoist and gantry systems, these spreader bars, attachment types, pivot frames are still very important to consider what's going to be best for your client. All right, let's do a quick recap of our attachment types. So firstly, we went through loop and clip attachments. We said that loop attachments are versatile and very adjustable. Clip attachments are stable and great for those that need that extra support and need to adjust their position while they're in the sling. Then we went through 2, 4, and 6-point spreader bars and pivot frames. So we said that our 2-point spreader bars are good for very quick and easy sling attachments and for a very closed sitting posture. Our 4 and 6-point spreader bars, we said, gives you a more open sling and gives more adjustability in your position from either sitting to a more reclined position. Then we had our pivot frame, which allows a nice upright sitting posture, also allows for adjustment from sitting to recline while the person is in the hoist, and allows for that more precise positioning. Then we talked about stand assist slings, which we said could be clip or loop attachments. Clip usually for those manual transfer aids, and loop attachments for those standing hoists. And then at the very end, we went for our ceiling hoist and gantry systems, which also can have your pivot frames and spreader bars, but more commonly has spreader bars with loop attachments. But at the end of the day, it's about safety, comfort, and dignity for both the client and the caregiver. I'd love to hear from you in the comments. Let me know what your experience has been with these different attachment types, which ones have worked for your clients and why, and stay tuned for the next episode on manual transfer aids. Thanks for joining us on Fast Intelligent Care. We hope you're leaving with fresh insights and tools to make a real impact as an occupational therapist. If you've got questions or topics you'd like us to cover, we'd love to hear from you. Don't forget to subscribe and join us every Tuesday for more ideas and strategies to deliver smarter, faster, and better care. Until next time, keep making a difference.